I don't know how much experience you've had with entrepreneurs, but the way I look at it, and you tell me what you think about this theory, is the founders that I've run into, it's like they just had one really good idea. They found a customer that had a challenge and solved the challenge for them. And then just did it and 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 did it. And at each time, it was almost like they were like, it's almost like flying a plane while building it.
Absolutely. There's three things that founders don't do well. They start a company, sell a company, and buy a company because they typically haven't done it before.
Yeah. Well said. So there's a thing about, I think, what we do in the chairing world is we give them confidence where they might be lacking confidence, or we bring them back to normal. Kind of like going back to maybe your financial advisor days. If you walked into someone and they were too aggressive, you had to kind of pull them back towards the center. And then if they were too conservative, you had to pull them back towards the center in some ways too. So I call it the yield curve of a decision. So picture you do an XY graph and you're adding data points to the data census. Well, the accuracy of said data census increases exponentially in the beginning, but then we hit what's called the law of diminishing returns. I don't know if your education system ever taught you about that. I know your financial planning did, with regard to yield curves and bonds, but we hit this inflection point.
Yep.
At 79% accuracy. And then what ends up happening is every data point we add to the data census increases the accuracy of the data census, but at a decreasing rate. So what I've noticed is people who are highly educated, maybe even a little too smart for their own good, like lawyers, professionals, PhDs, they tend to suffer from ready, aim, fire.
Yeah.
Where founders tend to suffer from ready, fire, aim. So what happens is when we put them in the same room, tackling the same challenges, the founders make fewer decisions, but better decisions. And in the case of the overeducated person, they make a decision. That's the genius of Vistage if I was to sum it up in any way, shape, or form. But what I want to do is I want to start with, I don't know how much experience you've had with entrepreneurs, but the way I look at it, and you tell me what you think about this theory, is the founders that I've run into, it's like they just had one really good idea. They found a customer that had a challenge and solved the challenge for them. And then just did it and 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 did it. And at each time, it was almost like they were like, it's almost like flying a plane while building it.
Absolutely.
And most of them have no idea how much risk they're really taking. So picture like one of the first presentations I had given in my presentation career, this is now 16 years ago, was in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And when you're a newbie speaker, you can lose control of the room, and I lost control of the room. So these are dominant personalities. I think the net worth in the room averaged 40 million.
Yeah.
So these are all hitters, especially back then. They pulled control away from me and they said, Mark, you're a financial advisor. What would you invest in today? And I turned to them and said, well, am I talking to normal people or am I talking to you?
Yeah.
And they got insulted. They were like, whoa, I'm not normal? I'm like, of course not. How many human beings are worth $40 million? Where 90% of their net worth is tied up into one investment, and they have no idea how much risk they're really taking.
Absolutely.
I said, I'll give you an example. Let's say everybody in this room threw in $1 million and we created an investment club, and then you wanted to hire me to run it. Well, where would I get a better rate of return? If I took every one of your $1 million and put it in the stock market, or if I gave each one of you back your $1 million, which would I get a better rate of return? And they all said, give it back to me. I'm like, do you see the challenge there?
Yeah.
So the concept is if you want to get rich, you have to concentrate your assets. That's the whole idea, the holy grail of starting a business. But if you want to stay rich, you got to diversify your assets. And most of them don't really recognize how to diversify their clientele so they don't experience the swings and the vagaries of the markets and the recessions. And then how do I invest a portfolio for someone who has 90% of their net worth tied up into one investment? It's completely inside out of what any other financial advisor would do. And then lastly, what I did was I actually figured out what creates extreme valuation in the era of Sarbanes-Oxley. How do we actually ring the cash register on that business for the maximum amount of money? I would imagine your experience in the capital markets and private equity helped you figure that out for your members.
Yeah, it's and there's a decisioning process here. So number one is, I want to be an entrepreneur. Well, what does that mean? And so I'll ask, here's my first qualifying question. If you're at the kitchen table and you're looking at entrepreneur, or you've got two offers in a corporate environment that are sitting on the table, and one of the spouses, you're having the conversation of, well, which one should we go with? And if the conversation is, well, the compensation packages are roughly the same, I think you should probably go with the one that's got the higher 401k match. And if that conversation doesn't want to make you throw up all over the kitchen table, then probably go down that route. And if that just feels absolutely distasteful, then you may be wired now or at the level of mindset where you want to jump in and invest in becoming an entrepreneur where you have a 5% chance of success. And here's the part of it too, is people don't know the journey. I'm going to become an entrepreneur. So when I ask people that want to be entrepreneurs, which I think is a phenomenal group of people who are thinking in that direction, how many companies in the U.S. produce over $1 million in revenue? And I'll get anywhere from 20, 30, 50, 60%. It's about 5%. And then there's a little area called no man's land, and Doug Tatum wrote a great book on it called No Man's Land. And it's that area between 2 and 5 million in revenue. And it's where companies, once they reach it, they typically go to die. They don't get out of there. And there's a well-worn path how to get out of there, but most people don't know where they are. And then once you get through that, to get to how many companies in the United States make more than 10 million in revenue. And I'll get like, well, most of them, etc. Actually, it's 0.4%. So 99.6% of companies will never achieve that. And so if you don't know where you're going to, you don't know what the terrain looks like, you don't know the processes and the resources that you need to get there, it's a very difficult space. And
one of the things I've noticed with that too is when I see my YouTube algorithm push people like you and I to me, or that claim they're like you and I smell BS on them. Like, have you ever noticed like how many people on YouTube claim they're billionaires? I'm thinking you can rest assured if a guy's on YouTube claiming they're a billionaire, they're not a billionaire.
Yeah, and I love social media. It's incredibly powerful. I think if anyone these days are like, oh, I'm not a fan of social media, I don't like its marketing. And my question is, hey, do you like to swim? I'm like, yeah, well, I don't know what you're asking me, but I don't mind swimming. I'm like, all right, well, do it without your arms and legs. And that's what it's like. Well, I don't believe in sales training. I don't believe in marketing. I don't believe in having, it's just an incredibly powerful tool. And it's, what is the mindset and whom do we go? How do we surround ourselves with credibility? And to touch on your YouTube component, I would offer that many of the least credible people are the ones who are telling you most what you should do. And you probably want to include family in there. The most credible people ask you questions and then they question your answers.
Yeah.
At least from my experience. If
that doesn't sum up a chair, I don't know what does. That, and maybe like wanting to leave impact.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. I'm getting over open heart surgery right now. Like I had open heart surgery 2 years ago on my birthday. And so it leaves me with the motivation to leave the world a better place. So, and I think actually most men feel that way. I can't speak for women about that. I lack the authority. But the idea is I think most men feel similarly. And then what does that look like? So how does that tie back? Because I think what people are missing is there's a spirituality to commerce. When I was speaking, I used the term, through commerce, we're capable of what religion hopes to accomplish and what politicians fail at, which is taking care of large-scale communities. Like if I was to add up all the employees of your members, we're probably in the thousands range, maybe
Absolutely.
Deep into thousands. So, yeah, but then what if we added in their customers? What if we added in their families, the vendors? You see where I'm going with it?
Yeah.
The impact is amazing. So the argument is, and then I think what we can do is just to make sure we're on point, pointing them in the right direction as best we possibly can, is to have best practices between chairs. Like what makes the most sense. And there is a couple of things I'm seeing in Vistage that has me a little concerned. I think they're attempting to look good to the public, and therefore they might be lowering their standards about what chairs they're allowing in. So I see that as a little bit disturbing, because there's an arrogance creeping into Vistage that has me concerned. It's the same arrogance that I'm seeing creep into virtually everywhere. Not in Dallas, but I'm seeing it in like Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Boston, places like that, where it's like they want to believe their beautiful lies. So human beings are hardwired to believe beautiful lies. Economics, which I'm sure your undergraduate degree helps you figure that out, is all about poking holes in beautiful lies.
Yeah.
So it goes over quite poorly unless the person's in the right frame of mind. They have to be open to dissenting opinions. And we've got a lot of talk about diversity in the world today, yet I'm not so sure we're really getting diversity of opinion. I think we might be getting the opposite. Has me very concerned about the university systems being indoctrinated in effect, an ideological monoculture that I think we're even seeing in Vistage. I doubt in your neck of the woods yet, but I've actually had members come up to me and say that in job interviews, we're finding young people bringing their parents to job interviews.
Yeah, I have there's a Vistage member in the Midwest, and they're pretty large, almost 1,000 employees, and they have a policy of how you handle it when the parent wants to come into the job interview.
Okay, so pray tell, how do they do it?
It's their policy is the parent is not allowed to be part of the job interview. They're welcome to remain outside, but in no way can they participate in the action.
It's amazing we have to have that as a policy, you know? Because I don't know if you've had Gil Cargill speak yet. He does on kind of hiring and sales training and stuff.
I haven't had him yet. I have heard of him, yes.
Yeah, so what he told me was that he was in charge of hiring a new head of sales in California. This tends to be like a California thing, but the deal is that whatever happens in California tends to spread across the rest of the United States. So that has me very concerned, because this was now almost 15 years ago. He was in charge with hiring the new head of sales for a large corporation, and a 35-year-old dude showed up with his parents, and it was like, I said, "Holy crap, what'd you do?" He said, "I validated their parking." That was the policy. So, are there any things that you're seeing that are common threads that you see with members that they're struggling with at this point?
Yeah, I would say number one is getting the leadership team right. So if we look at where's the greatest value in what is an organization? It's people and it's communication. And as the leader of that, how do you get great people? I would say great people, you communicate clearly, and then those great people will develop systems and processes which allow ordinary people to excel. And
I like that.
And then right in there, it's, all right, well, what's the right role? And this is very EOS-y here, but who are the right people on the bus and off the bus? So employees, partners, and who are the right clients on and off the bus? And who are the right vendors on and off the bus? And those need to be looked at specifically. And then how do you scale the business? So if you're you get from 0 to 1 million, you want to get from 1 million to at least 5x the business to get through no man's land. What is the path towards that? And if you want to 10x the business, and there is a formulaic path through that. And it's how do you focus on the 20% that provides the most value, and then the 80% that help get you there, how do you get rid of that? Because that's now going to anchor you to your future growth, and not in a positive way. And so there's a lot of rebirth and reorganization, and those are very difficult decisions, because we typically, how do you do that if you haven't done it before?
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to the confidence thing. And that's one of the beauties of Vistage as a whole, is because, to me, it's really like an ad hoc board of directors for non-publicly traded companies, right?
Absolutely.
So it's kind of like, it's something that I figured out, actually, believe it or not, on my own. So I had a radio show back in 2003, and I was interviewing CEOs on a regular basis. And I noticed as soon as we turned off the on-air light, they would start complaining. And they all had the same complaints. They fell into 8 categories, 2 of which were the most common. And I said, I got those complaints too. I said, what if we got together on a regular basis, once a month, once a quarter, that type of thing, and then created an accountability circle about what do you want to build, not just make it a bitch session, but what do you want to build, and then be held accountable to manifesting that.
Yeah.
So and then so I set one up, and then I started talking about it on the air, and I got a call from a competitor to Vistage, who kind of came across as they were giving me the absolute full court press. And so it came across as amateurish to me. And I just said, I'm gonna take a moment here and analyze the industry. And then I found Vistage. Back then it was actually called Tech, the executive committee. So that's how old I am. I predate the Vistage branding. So, and then what happened was I said, hey, I've already built one, maybe what we could do is start one of these type of things up. And they were like, sure. And that's what started me back in 2008, 2009. And what it came down to is that even though, in order for it to work, you have to have non-competing members in the room, like no financial relationships. Otherwise, people will be in a battle up, armor up environment. We want down. And then what if we can sit back and say, all right, you've got an issue. Well, I've been there and dealt with that, or I can view it from a vantage point that's not emotional, because it's not my issue. Mm-hmm. And then what I do is just ask a lot of really good questions, and then sit back and say, okay, this is what I would do if it was me. This is what I would do if it was me. And then once they actually go through that process, now they get to select what's the best advice they heard, and then what are they going to do about it. So but I think one of the key here is that I think all too often the members, back to like the Vistage challenges, the members try to assign accountability to the chair. And I don't know that that's actually the best way to do it. I think it's actually better if they assign accountability to each other.
Absolutely.
And the reason why is because, like, let's say we're only members, and you're the biggest BS detector in my Vistage group. Well, I want you to know what's wrong with my company, because I tend to, like, human nature being what it is, I want to focus on what I'm good at because I like it.
Yeah.
See, what I'm bad at, I suck at, I hate. So I avoid that. And this is where I think there's a natural mistake we make in the early stages of chairing. We turn to the membership and say, okay, guys, I'm booking speakers. Who do you want to hear? Well, who I want to hear and who I need to hear are not necessarily the same thing. They're probably the opposite. Yeah. So what I want to do is say, okay, which one's going to move the needle the most on my challenges? It's the very thing I don't want to do. So I'd want you to know what's wrong with my company, so I'm not able to slime out and process little kiddie pool issues. Like, hey, it's 2 employees that are fighting. What should I do about it? I'm going to stop wasting our time. You've been ignoring your sales and marketing for a decade. It's costing you $20 million. What are you doing about that? Like, that's what I would want from you. And then I would offer that same thing in return. The key, though, I figured out is that I got to provide that first. I got to hold you accountable in an uncomfortable way so that you'll want to repay me in spades.
Yeah, and being part of a Vistage group, it's learning to be uncomfortable, and I would say it's also learning to fail quickly, responsibly, and effectively. A Vistage group is a microcosm of a company, and so there's industry-related companies. I'll touch on that a little bit. I think it's great to be a part of an industry group, because then you can look at best practices. You have some sort of similar backgrounds, and you may be competing, but there's constructs of learning. The most powerful learning is to have companies that are unrelated to what you do. And why that's so cool is all companies are similar. So whenever I hear a CEO founder say, no, I'm unique. Well, you're unique from the company registration and so on, but you're similar because the blood tests that work on you work on me for the most part. The medications, similar. And the effective, and if we look at just a little bit outside of business, a different metaphor or analogy. So we have a pretty good idea how to get fit, X amount of protein and so on. And how do you start moving? But why are we relatively unsuccessful as a society and becoming fitter? And so what is the credibility? What is the construct? And what are those steps that I'm doing today? And in Vistage with the non-competing peers, the responsibility of behavior is among the individuals. The chair, as they are leaders in their own groups, the chair's role is to point in the right direction, get out of the way, and allow the members to elevate their own success.
Yeah, and boy, that's awesome. I call that a team is always a reflection of its leader.
Yeah, and through that, my development and failings as a chair, I think it's always important to look at that is, what is that standard? How do we maintain that standard? And what's it like when that standard fails? So I'm entirely responsible for that. I'm 100% responsible for that. And also the responsibility among the group members. A high-performing group, as you know well, is where people elevate each other through challenging conversations and not accepting generalistic solutions or, no, I'm okay. I'm not okay, and I'm not going to be okay because you're not demonstrating responsibility and leadership. And therefore, from my perspective as a chair, we are now starting to slip. And families and groups like this, they're very powerful. However, if you allow weakness or substandard levels of performance, they can devolve very quickly. And
yeah, there was I don't know if you ever met Norma Rosenberg. She was picture she'd be about this tall, and if she was on this call, you'd see as a puff of white hair. So she hit me with some wisdom on the very first VCG meeting I was ever at, and in New York City. Mm-hmm. And what she said was that it's been her experience that CEOs throw psychological reins around their own company and pull it back to the level they're comfortable at. I was like, damn. So what's the enemy of great? Good. So it's how do we create an ethos of deliberate discomfort where we turn and heat up underneath ourselves? So part of it's like, okay, if I'm an entrepreneur, where do I start? Some of that's just like, okay, which of the industries are going to thrive going forward? That's a relatively easy exercise. In fact, I run it in my presentation, and I'll do a whole series of explainer videos on that to help them get to a certain level. But beyond that, it's a very lonely experience, even with spouses. I'll give you an example. My spouse is an environmental educator. She doesn't know how to run a business. She kind of knows how to balance her own checkbook. And the argument, though, is when she's turning to me, asking me, how's business? What is she really asking me? Do I own the future? So it can be quite lonely. So that I think partly the world of Vistage is to end the isolation. Let's call that maybe the first rung in the ladder. Then it's, how do I raise my game? And it comes back to a very simple concept to me. If you want to be a better tennis player, you have to play tennis with better tennis players. That's what Vistage is. So sometimes just getting to know people like you raises my game. There's a thing about, let's call it male competition. So men compete with each other historically from all the way back into our ancestral past. Typically it was for women, but we create hierarchies of sporting events when we were little kids, and we try to vie for who's the top dog. So we compete against each other. After a certain level of competition, especially around businesses and organizations, now we start to compete with each other. So it's how do I root for you that you're frankly kicking so much ass your foot hurts? And that makes me want to raise my own game. I'm getting chills thinking about this right now. So when I associate with people who have kind of been there and done that, they raise my game. They also raise my own expectations on myself, and they raise the expectations of what's possible around me. So and I noticed that in my very first Vistage meeting, it was the first time, John, I ever felt normal in my life, because I've been abnormal my entire life. Maybe you can relate to that.
Absolutely.
You're definitely not a normal guy, right? So I would argue Vistage members are all abnormal. If they were normal, they probably wouldn't be in Vistage. They wouldn't qualify to sit in Vistage because the amount of work that has to go in over years and years and years consistently is very difficult to achieve. But the idea is I'm sitting around the room, and I look around the room in a Vistage meeting, and I go, well, these guys are circus freaks just like me.
Yeah. And
I noticed something fascinating. One of the guys in the room, everybody else in the room deferred to this guy. Now, he didn't know that because when he talks, when he's delivering his wisdom in the what's called issue processing, he talks to his shoes. Right? Okay. So he kind of goes, it's like a habit. He's kind of like, well, if it was me, I'd do the blah, blah, blah. What he didn't notice was everybody else in the room was staring at him like he was E.F. Hutton in that old ad,
Yeah.
When E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen, that whole deal. Everyone was staring at him like this is the guru on the Temple Mount, right?
Yeah.
And I just started to him and I said, I don't know, I've never seen this before. I'm taking this guy to lunch. So I did. And I told him that scenario. I said, he said, why'd you want to go to lunch with me? I said, because everybody else in the room just stares at you when you're delivering wisdom. I said, what's up? He goes, well, I think I know. He goes, I just sold my company for $168 million, which was the highest multiple in that industry ever based on revenue. Right. So there's like a thing about that, raising your game and having people like that in your life where it's like, oh, this is possible. Because, what's amazing to me is how few people know about Vistage, and then how few people have joined. Because to throw some statistics around some of those numbers that you used earlier on the call is there are 600,000 companies doing more than 5 million in the United States. It might only be 4% of all the companies that exist, or 0.4, whatever that is. But there's only 22,000 unique members, if I understand correctly. So what is it about too many of the business owners that don't recognize how playing tennis with better tennis players makes you a better tennis player? So what is it about their arrogance or maybe their own foolishness that holds them back from that? I think there's a massive opportunity for them to realize what they might be missing out on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so arrogance is one point. I would say I phrase two kinds of ignorance. One is ignorance that you don't know that these organizations exist. Fine. The second is that you know that that they exist and you decide not to participate in them. And within the construct, as we're talking about the companies and growth, I ask all Vistage members and candidates, how many CEOs do you know? And do you know what that answer typically sounds like?
I would say like 5.
Yeah, tops. I might get 1 or none. And so that means that you have people who are playing a professional sport, which is owning and growing a company, and they don't know any other people doing it. And I understand why, because it's here, right? You're in the woods, you're bouncing against the trees, and hey, John, I don't even know where to meet these people. And then there's Vistage, and as I think their latest count, 45,000 leaders within the organization. And it's still a small construct of what's out there. And within the Vistage meetings, as you learn and what responsibility and leadership looks like, and you start making better decisions, you start getting better results, it's also, there's a wealth of information out there that you have absolutely no idea when you're driving blind. And that's maybe an analogy there. It's all right. Cover up both eyes and run at 100 miles an hour and see where you get to. And that's kind of like what it's running a business on your own without peers and expertise around you. At least from my perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah. So that whole thing is like, how much risk are they really taking? But it astonishes me that they don't see benefit in that. And I think it might be that they're like, I've got this. They've been doing that for so long. Because to me, if your nose is too close to the grindstone, you can't look over the horizon or around the corner. Yeah.
Well, so it's interesting. If we look at another return type, a risk return construct. So we know what the average market S&P 500 rate of return is, called 7-ish%. But then if you have someone who manages money, like what I would call a real professional trader, what they would do is, here's my trading model or models. Here's all the data, how you execute. You go run them and see if you get similar results. And that is a very high-end trader. And typically, they don't need other people's money. They might take on a client or two. And it's not an 80, like a hedge fund payout, where they pay 20% of the returns, but they typically keep 80% of the returns. And on a risk-adjusted basis, they're outliers. And there aren't very many of those out there, just like there aren't Olympians and so on. And so what I would say in the business, it's, if I'm running a company very well, and I'm in the top 5%, so Vistage-led companies outperform non-Vistage companies, particularly in times of challenge, by a lot. But within Vistage, 20% of the companies are, we would say, well-run. 5% are investment grade, and that means that you get an 8 to 10x premium versus your peers in the industry when you sell. And that works across those numbers work across all sorts of fields. So they're pretty consistent. And so how do you get in front of that information and realizing which pile you're in and then start to elevate that? And there's a clear path towards that. There's better practices to get there. And once you start realizing that, and then, the phenomenal speakers that we have, and just as companies are scaling, and I've seen companies triple, 5x, 10x within my almost 5 years of being a chair at Vistage. And I deal with companies from about $1 million to almost $1 billion in revenue. And what is the construct of the Vistage group? So mine is, as a chair, we lead growth. We lead growth. Oh, you know what? We want 50% of your time back. Because it's very difficult to be a leader if you're playing an instrument in the orchestra, right? Composers compose, and you never play an instrument again. Now, I really love sales. I really love marketing. And, I'd love you to find a better person than you at doing it, right? Because now we come into valuation, and this is also how well you run a company. Hey, CEO, founder, owner, can you take 2 weeks off consecutively, have zero touch with the business, and it continues to be run at least as well or better while you're gone? And if I get, yeah, probably, I'm like, okay. Can you take 30 days off? Yeah, no, John, I can't. Probably not. No, I couldn't do that. Could you take 60 days off? Hey, did you hear the answer about the 30 days? No, I can't take 60 days off. As a private equity guy in the past, let's take 2 turns of valuation off of your business, because you're not scalable. You made yourself too important. Get over yourself. And I know there's a really good probability that you've been restricting the success of your organization. And here's the big secret. When a company buys your company, they want nothing to do with you for the most part. They might keep you on for a year. If you didn't negotiate well and you had a tail on that exit of 3 or 4 year earnouts, which I don't typically advise, then you're really restricting what you're creating, and it's your biggest investment, it's your biggest asset, and you've done at that point a predominant amount of work to make sure that the valuation is nowhere near where it should be and could be.
Okay, so the what I want to do is actually to bring it all the way back down to entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because, okay, we've got this vast wisdom here of people who have kind of been there and done that, and they actually answer almost a formulaic way about how to grow and scale their businesses so that they can experience an extreme valuation exit. But I think there's a thing. Like, I had a conversation with a young man last night who was basically telling me that his entire generation is fucked. And I said, well, that it is. So the real deal is that we're living in some of the best times ever in the history of the world. We're the safest, healthiest, wealthiest human beings to ever walk the earth, yet people don't know that because of something called the negativity bias, right? So part of it is, this is what I think is the secret ingredient. If a person has less gray hair than me or you, they have a massive opportunity if they can lead.
Yeah.
And the real reason why is because those 2 generations, whether it's the millennials or the Gen Z, were overparented. In fact, I would argue, I don't know that private equity could articulate this, but partially the reason why private equity wants earn-out deals is because they don't necessarily trust the next 2 generations to lead. In fact, everybody that I'm aware of that's in an earn-out is being asked to stay longer.
Okay.
And the reason why is because they're struggling to find leadership that can follow up. And, you can see maybe another way to analyze this is HR departments are kind of running things now. And frankly, when the HR departments are running things, nothing's run right, including HR. So there's like a rise in kind of narcissism because of the overparented generation. So what does that mean? There's a massive opportunity.
Enormous opportunity.
Yes. And as soon as you can lead, you can eat everybody else's lunch. So the question is, okay, how do you find something that rewards you for getting out of bed in the morning? Then what happens is, okay, now it's like your meaning in life is to do this, and it's not work. Now you start to get into like our historical perspective of, I had, in my very first survey that I did for Vistage, I had 3 80-year-old men reporting working 80 hours a week. And a strong handful of them said, I said, how many hours a week do you work? A strong handful of them said, I don't work because I love what I do. You know what I mean? And I was really looking for something tangible. I could say, okay, these people, you know, because is Tim Ferriss right? The 4-hour work week, I think he's very, very, very wrong. And the reason why is because the average work week in Vistage is 55 hours a week.
Yeah.
But the idea here is, how do you find something that rewards you for getting out of bed in the morning and then just go kick so much ass at it, your feet hurt? So, and I think the reward is, we're living in the best time ever. It doesn't feel like it, but we're living in the best time ever. I can cite all sorts of statistics to prove what I'm telling you is actually the correct. But then how do you become one of those few people who can lead? Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah. So number one, as you mentioned, the second generation family ownership, third generation, the success rate by the third generation is almost zero.
Yeah.
And so statistically, it doesn't work well. I think if you want to be an entrepreneur, one is, all right, well, what's the area that you want to deal in and so on? I would say, here's another way to look at it. Look at buying a company. Learn what it's like to buy a company. And I don't mean, it doesn't need to be a big company, but if 95% of companies can't break over $1 million in revenue, let's start looking for a company that's above $1 million in revenue. If you want to be able to get through, de-risk it further, let's look at something that's getting through no man's land past the $2 to $5 million mark. People are like, well, I can never afford to buy a company. Well, if you don't know how to go buy a company, acquisition, entrepreneurship, it's often a less risky way to get into entrepreneurship. One is, the toughest is start the company from the ground up and build it and break gravity every day. I prefer that somebody else has broken the gravity. And even if, you start this company from the ground up, then look at acquisition as part of your growth.
Nice. Yeah, because I think one of the things I recommend for people who are younger than me is to join trade associations.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that you want to get into, and then let it be known you're in acquisition mode.
Absolutely. And speak to people who have successfully done acquisitions. So I would say credibility in that. Somebody who's done 100 or more purchases of companies. That's a good point.
Mental right there.
Yeah, and if I want to go run a couple marathons or ultramarathons, well, I talk to somebody who's done it 3 times. I prefer someone who's done it 40, 50 times. I actually prefer someone who's trained 100 people that sort of look like me, move like me at my age, to do it successfully, and that demonstrates credibility. So what is the level of credibility in the people of competence whom you surround yourself with? I think that's vitally important.
You know, this is funny. When I actually stepped down as chair of my group, I did it because my speaking started to really take off. And I was running 2 different organizations on top of chairing and speaking at the same time. I went from speaking about 10 to maybe 10, 15 times a year to 100.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, it's a ton of travel. So my best practice chair, Bob Duncan, he kind of pulled me aside at one point. He's like, can I get you back into chairing? And I was like, look, running a financial advising company is a joke compared to running regular companies. Like, so once the thing's moving, it's like, we don't have P&L, we got P, right? So it's like, how do you deal with the fact that we have so few employees per revenue dollar, and we know exactly what the valuation is. The risk is really, really quite low. Now, the barrier to entry is really quite high. The Series 7 is a very difficult license to actually get, and getting clients is very, very difficult. That's the hard part. The hard part isn't running the business. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to do a deep dive on what are all these other businesses, how do they build themselves, what is the secret to their success, what have you. And I said, when I'm done with this, I'll know more than the majority of chairs in the country.
Absolutely.
In fact, the study I'm doing right now, John, if you want to participate, you're welcome to.
Love to.
I'm going to be able to actually tell Vistage how valuable it is to be a Vistage member in dollar figures.
No, I think it's phenomenal.
Right. And then for certain chairs who want to participate, I'm going to be able to tell them how valuable it is to be their member. So I think that might actually take it where, some CEOs sit across the table saying, you're telling me I could be worth 20 million more and maybe 15 million on top of that in growth every year. The answer is yes. Here's the proof from a third party audited source. The guy's not signing the paperwork immediately. He's too stupid or arrogant to deserve a seat at the table. You know what I mean? So, but the idea here is that when you actually sit back and look at what creates that type of credibility, you have to kind of be there and done that, be there and done that, be there and done that. And at this point where I'm at is I'm either surveyed, directly counseled, or presented to just over 20,000 CEOs. I did 4,200 last year alone. It totals 2.2 trillion in revenue.
I love it.
Somewhere around it's somewhere between 9 million to 10 million employees. So, and then, okay, what keeps them up at night? Like, I'll give you an example. In my first survey, it was hiring. Hiring kept them up at night. And frankly, 87% of all my CEOs was having trouble sleeping at night. And I think that's partially my and your responsibility and frankly, I consider speaking, sharing, but on a national level,
Yes.
It's like being a guest chair for a couple of hours, that type of thing. So the idea is that it's our responsibility to figure out what's keeping them up at night and how to minimize those fears as much as we possibly can, because our mind is an anachronism designed for the Pleistocene. So we're worried about things that really don't exist most of the time. So it's like, but how can we take the reality of their risk and minimize their overall risk, which actually has a positive impact on the overall valuation? So what it does is success leaves clues. How do we make that happen? And then what happens is look at them from an opportunity perspective. I think today the challenges I see with Vistage members is they're concerned about things. They think we're headed into a recession, which you typically don't get in election years. You can argue the White House applies pressure to the Fed to keep interest rates artificially low, and that gives kind of a sugar high to the economy and the marketplaces. Comes back to haunt us later on, but they take credit for that sugar high. That's classic, whether it's Democrats or Republicans. So the idea, though, is I think what they're dealing with right now, the biggest fear I'm sensing, is that they are trepidation. They're a little gun shy. Their customer base is shy to pull the trigger, but I think it's because of trepidation about the election. Like at the time we're recording this, we're in late August. So we got a few more months here before America decides on who the next president's going to be.
Yes.
But this is one of the oddest election cycles I remember in history, like the history of the time that I've been aware of election cycles. So I think people are a little trepidatious about that as opposed to what they were afraid of a decade ago. But it's kind of amazing how much fear actually exists out there and then what we can do about it.
Yeah, and so fear feeds on itself. And in Vistage, we say, your mind is a dangerous neighborhood to enter alone.
That's a great line. Wait, steal that line. That's good. Absolutely. That's the first time I've heard that in 16 years. So I'm not so sure if Vistage says that. I think you say that.
And what's critical as you're making what I call abnormal bets, which is betting on yourself now. And how do you move the needle in your direction? How do you get past the noise? Because the majority of what you hear out there, it isn't valuable. And the way I prove that is it's typically not valuable until you surround yourself with valuable people. And here is a caveat to becoming an entrepreneur. Here's a caveat to joining Vistage. Here's a caveat to becoming a better leader is your relationships will change. Because there's hierarchical level of communications. And if you're here and now you start communicating at this level, and I don't mean in a money sense, but there's a knowledge basis, and that language is different, and it's different from, so you just can't communicate anymore. It doesn't work like that. And so the relationships change over time, and you don't go back. So here's the other caveat is if you want to, from a want-to-be-preneur to an entrepreneur, is be very careful about that step. Number one, the chasm is enormous from being institutionalized to be an employee to becoming an entrepreneur. And I've done that myself, and you'll probably work much of your lifetime making sure that you continue to move in the right direction. The other is you probably won't be able to go back.
Yeah, it's what do they call it? It's I'm unemployable now.
Yeah, and because you don't want to be employed, and the great thing about running a business is on a tax efficiency basis, a flexibility, you can design intentionally the life that you want, or you can have delegate that responsibility to other people to design it for you. and just have to make a choice. Both can be successful lives. Just have to make sure which one resonates most powerfully with you.
Yeah, again, why you get out of bed in the morning. Because I believe there's a spirituality of commerce, and we can tap into that. But most people aren't aware of it because they listen to people who have never been there and done that. Like the majority of all professors in business school have never actually owned or ran a business. It's all theoretical. There's a few of them out there. I believe Auburn insists that if you're going to be a professor, you have to actually have run a business. You have to.
That's very cool. I love that.
P&L. I like that too. I think, what it also does, it keeps them grounded in reality, because I think you guys are seeing, even in Dallas, are starting to see the wackiness of the wishful thinking. That, I want life to be this way. And if you tell me life isn't that way, then I don't want to listen to you. That is prevalent in the university system. In fact, there's an organization called FIRE, Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, that runs a watchdog group that keeps an eye on universities that are worst at this. And as of right now, the Ivy Leagues are in the top 10 worst universities in the world for that sort of thing. You sit back going, wow, that's definitely different than the way I viewed the Ivy Leagues back when I was in college.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on. I think one thing that we have to be very careful of is we can blame a lot of our woes or our lack of movement on external factors that we can't control at a macro level, and be it the economy, be it inflation, be it interest rates. However, what can I control at my level? What are the check marks that I can do today that demonstrate credibility? And so that's just on the entrepreneurship is when you set a goal, whether it's business or otherwise, it's make believe. It's all pie in the sky. Nobody cares. When we start caring, when it starts becoming a more responsible goal, is what am I doing today? Things that I can control that will most likely lead to that outcome.